Okay, Internet. This is take 3 of me trying to film this. This is going to come as a surprise, but I talk too much. You heard it here first. So trying to move through this quicker. Won't work. Apologies. What are we talking about? We are talking about the excellent discussion that has been going on the Disc Golf Form Check Facebook page. Because someone posted about Josh's new video about arming the disc. My thoughts on this are complicated. I have a lot of respect for Josh. When I started coaching, it was Josh and Loop Ghost that I consumed the entirety of their material that was available at the time and learned absolutely a ton from both of those guys. So any standing on the shoulders of giants that I have done is because of those two gentlemen. That said, I am going to attack some of Josh's ideas in this video. I am not attacking Josh. I like Josh very much. He's a very kind, respectable, knowledgeable person. So this is not throwing shade at Josh. We like Josh. But let's get into it. So the video opens with Josh saying something along the lines of, if you want pro level form, you have to arm the disc. Linguistically, I have a couple of challenges with that. My version of that statement would be, if you already have pro level form, you are arming the disc, right? If you don't have pro level form, me as a coach saying to you, you have to arm the disc is one of the least productive cues I can give you. That is because there's this weird thing that happens in someone's progression where usually most people, dudes especially, start out arming the disc too much. They're doing too much of the work with their arm and not enough of the work with the rest of their body, right? We've all seen that. It works pretty well out to 300, 400 if you're very athletic, 450 if you're amazing. But it's not good form, right? You're not using your whole body. It's not efficient. So to that person, we might say, let your arm go limp noodle. Don't pull the disc. Just swing your arm with your hips and your torso. And that would usually help them find some degree of success in that they would be getting to more looseness and they might feel more of the mechanics of the throw. Then once that same player starts to establish good ground forces and a good brace and some good body mechanics, once their timing is synced up, their kinetic chain is flowing well from the ground up, then telling them, okay, now put some more stink on it with your arm, can be a very productive cue. And anyone who's getting to 400 and beyond is doing that, most likely. I don't think arm the disc is a good cue globally for everyone. I don't think much of anything is a good cue globally for everyone. So moving on to the amateur position versus the pro position. Josh demos an amateur position where the chest is forward, the pocket is collapsed, and I forget if he said that you're spilling over the brace, but you are. Something he did not point out is that in his throw, where he's throwing poorly on purpose, his rear leg is south on the tee pad, right? Look at everyone who's good. They don't do that. That didn't get pointed out. I feel like that's really important. But the pro position, first of all, a shout out to Ellie Ezra and Henna for being included in those pictures. Excellent work. I love it. The folks in that video, those pictures that Chris Taylor sent are, what was being pointed out is that the elbow is in front of the rotation. Yeah, it is. Is that the most important thing? I don't think so. I think the most important thing is that. Every single one of them, to a lesser extent, Paul, Garrett Gerthy, and Albert Tom, probably as a function of body type or a downforce throw, I don't know. They all have this angle in their front leg. Their rear leg is totally off the ground, right? Handlebars. They're here. All of their pressure is in that front foot, and the front hip is well behind the front foot. Never do they get to this position while they still have the disc. They'll get there after the disc is gone, they'll come up to balance, but not before. So I think the primary thing that's happening in those stills is the ground force is stopping the front hip, right? So to tie in with that real quick, Seabass just came out with a video, something about the whip step drill. I think if you look up whip and Seabass, you'll find it. But as I'm still not sold on the whole thing as a thing. I think the throw, whoever it is that throws the first throw in that video, that's something looks sketchy there to me. Obviously he throws very well, he's a pro, but I don't really like that form. Looks like he's falling over to the right too much. But the drill that Seabass presents, I think, is absolutely brilliant. So what he's doing, and part of it is he's stepping forward into a lunge and then stepping back, and saying that your throw is going to happen during that lunge, and then you're going to push back because the front foot is actually pushing back, right? So if we take that and spin it a little bit into a thought experiment, if I'm running along this way and I somehow plant this foot into the ground in a way that completely stops my front hip, what is my rear hip going to do? It's going to continue forward, and it's going to hinge around this hip. It's going to go boom, like that. And then that is kind of sort of what a brace looks like, right? If we could get it more dynamic, that's the still that we find all those people in with their elbow well in front. I don't think this should be the focus. I think containing the front hip with the front foot should be the focus. So I think that the drill is an excellent thought experiment for getting to the hip position that we want. And then Josh goes on to talk about power from the ground up. And he says, that he used to think that, now he doesn't think it. And that he thinks that that thought of power from the ground up causes the amateur position. I disagree. I feel like a lack of containment of the front hip causes the amateur position, right? If you don't get the front hip to stop, the front hip keeps going, everything spills over the front. You don't get containment, you don't get compression in your arc. More on that later. So it seems like we disagree on that. Then when he goes on to explain how power works from the ground up, maybe he's just explaining how it doesn't work because he explained how it doesn't work. He says that, the feet go and then the hips go and then the shoulders go and you're trying to leave the hand back here and then somehow that causes whip, but it doesn't because you're not syncing up the timing of everything right. And he talks about the cue of leaving your hand back. Leaving your hand back is not a good cue. Everybody agrees with that. Nobody thinks that's good anymore. Where it is a good cue is if someone is pulling early, it might be good to say, hey, just leave your hand back there as long as you can. Just leave it there. And when it gets pulled by your torso rotating forward, then you'll be closer to optimal timing, and that might help break someone out of muscle memory of pulling early, of arming the disc, right? So it's all about sequence, and just telling someone to arm the disc doesn't seem like it's going to fix that to me. So how does starting from the ground up actually work, right? So Josh says that some of it has to be, he said something like that is going to have to be some form of rotation. Yes and no. Like he demos it, saying linear, and then somehow something's rotation. Or he says twist the hips at some point. You do not twist your hips. Your hips are not twisted by you. Your hips do get twisted by your momentum and your ground forces. So that's what the Seabass drill shows you, right? You have momentum. If you stop one hip, you will get a twist because this one will keep going. That's what happens in a high-level brace. A lot of weird stuff goes on to make some momentum going kind of this way in your rear leg, your rear hip. So your rear hip is going this way. It wants to keep going that way. And then your rear hip gets stopped. The front quad gets loaded, and then the front quad pushes this hip backwards. So this one goes backwards. This one keeps going forward. That's level one. That's hip torque. This one is moving that way. This one is moving this way. It's torque. It makes your spine rotate in place. Level two is you can add more power with the front leg once you have your knee safety stuff figured out, and you're not going to let your knee rotate forward. You're going to keep that linear. So you have a linear hip shift this way and a linear hip shift this way, this hip goes straight back, this one goes forward, they pass each other. That creates torque. You can also add to the pop of the rear hip by allowing the rear leg to internally rotate a little bit. It's not a huge motion. And extending the leg behind you. So hopefully you can see that there's some amount of forward pop here because my glute fires and pulls my leg back. Like if you imagine I was trying to punch someone with my hip, that works, right? This motion, boom, makes the hip come forward. So that motion, boom, can add power, it can add hip torque to your throw by rotating your spine. So that's what I think is happening in ground up power. You're getting a stop, you're adding to it with the rear leg pushing the rear hip forward, you're adding to it with the front leg pushing the front hip up and back, getting a level change here on these hips, something else Josh has told us about. Then you're also adding to that by X factor, shoulder to hip separation. Do the hips fire first and then the shoulders come afterwards? No, they start at the same time. Your shoulders have just turned back farther. When your hips start going, your shoulders start going at the same time. So that's that. Chris Taylor has data on that. He can prove that. Bug him about it. Make him do it. C, check in the notes. Ground up, twisting, disagree. Okay, so the elbow stuff. I feel like what gets missed here is that we don't want the arm loose because yes, the arm loose creates a collapsed pocket. What we want is the elbow joint and down loose. We want the elbow to be supported and tied to this structure, meaning the torso and the shoulders. So if I do that, if I tie this to my ribs and I tie this to my bicep, now I'm not going to collapse my pocket anymore. Now I'm going to start to get some whip in my hand, even without using my elbow. If my elbow is totally loose, I get whip. I get a coil in that's passive and a coil out that's passive. Theoretically, I can add to that, hopefully just on the tail end, but you don't need to until you're getting past 400, 450. And if you try to, back to our beginner who was arming it too much, if you arm the disc too much, that will circumvent any ability you have to develop this brace in the ground forces. If you want to understand how to do that stuff, look at the one leg drills. It's all in there. So what we're missing is that the elbow down can be loose, but the elbow can still be supported. It doesn't have to be I'm arming everything as hard as I can, or I'm flopping everything as hard as I can. This is something that someone on the Facebook page posted out the nuance of, is that you do want to fire your elbow, drive your elbow forward into horizontal upper arm abduction, to use Chris Taylor's fancy, what is it, anatomical term. But we don't want this to stay at 90. It's fine to try and keep it at 90 as a beginner. But what higher level players are doing is this shoulder angle is actually collapsing a couple 10, 20 degrees and then expanding 10 or 20 degrees too. So cross-reference this with Yanni from Spin Doctor, his Cook the Spaghetti drill, one of the most elegant drills in disc golf. He's talking about bending your elbow, using a backswing to power a passive bend in your elbow, and then keeping some tension in your tricep so that flings out. So you're essentially loading and flinging. You're slinging the disc to an extent. He's talking about doing that with your elbow. Take that idea and apply it to the shoulder. So keeping the whole arm straight, but still getting some collapse here, I'm exaggerating, and some extra opening here. You can get a lot of power there real quickly. It feels really weird to not bend your elbow, but when you then bend your elbow and you have two joints in play, so it feels like a gathering motion in the back where your shoulder is mobile, it's moving around, scooping like this. Your elbow is doing the same thing, your hand is doing the same thing. That all curls into a nice pocket, a deep pocket even if you want, and then everything goes out. So that's what we want. The reason we want that is because it compresses this elbow arc into less time and space, right? I've gone over that in other videos, but this has more power if it has your body weight behind it than this, because this is big and long and slow and too many parts are moving. But if you can get to a deep pocket, all of the mass sends all of its momentum into the whip tip, and that happens faster, right? So more stuff on swing path, but that's for a different video. Then we move into talking about Wiggins. I pretty much mostly agree with everything that Josh is saying about Wiggins. I think that's all correct. But where I might have some disagreement, or at least add some nuance, is Josh says that Wiggins is trying to keep everything back from when he plants the front foot. For the most part, I think that's right. I think he's building an axis of rotation that doesn't include the front hip, but the front leg and the front hip are on that axis. So it's kind of sort of right here, and it goes through this hip and this shoulder, and then everything rotates around that. So the front leg does not rotate. The front leg is stuck in the ground. The rotation happens here in gingerbread person mode. This move swims, well, not the swim part, just the down part before the swim, serves to connect this to this and to have this weight that more, so that this is the axis, right? And then given you set everything up so that this hip still has momentum coming forward and left-ish, forward and toe side-ish, and this hip is going to get momentum towards the heel side and up, this then going forward reflects around the central axis and pulls this backward. So I think Wiggins is trying to keep everything back, everything on that axis. So the head, the left shoulder, the right hip, I think that's all staying back. I think the left hip is allowed to go forward as much as it can, as quickly as it can, and that's being accelerated by driving the left leg straight, extending the left leg. That motion pulls the right shoulder back, which accelerates the whip even more. So if you can get to a deep pocket position with your front shoulder pulling towards the heel side in balance around a tilted axis, that's where you start to get crazy distance. That's where you start to get crazy power. And another thing that happens is he's able to lever his arm, hinging the last little bit of icing that we mentioned before. That only works because this hip containment happened. There's something to press against here, and the disc is getting heavy because it's in that arc. When the disc gets heavy, there's something to press against where you can actually start to get some extra pop on it. So that's my spin on the Wiggins stuff. 90% agree, but one little semantic thing of I don't think he's trying to keep everything back. I think he's trying to keep an axis and allow the rear hip to move forward because that's the power source of the throw. But Josh wraps up and he says the hand has got to beat the shoulders to the pocket. I completely agree with that. If the hand does not beat the shoulders to the pocket, then you're screwed. The only thing that I would add is you can have this structure. So what's missing from the model is connecting the elbow to the shoulder rotation with shoulder tension right here, which you can model by pushing the elbow. So it's not that you're holding the elbow static and rotating, it's that you want to be driving the elbow from here to there with shoulder muscle. And that's what gets you to a deep pocket. So it's not leaving your hand behind, it's not arming the disc, you're just impulsing from here to there during this bigger motion. And the way to feel the timing is to noodle arm it, right? And feel how it wants to come out. Once you've felt that a bunch, then you can start to add to it. Josh's closing statement for the video, I also completely agree with that, but go watch it, see what he says. All right, good luck, internet. See ya.